pleasure.
Was it the budget committee that you'd been on before the planning board?
No, not the budget committee. So I'm with the
What was it?
broadband and the planting board.
And what was the other one?
Tell me again.
Broadband and
This planning board.
on this planning board.
And then I've been visiting historic resources because they keep tearing down some of my favorite houses in town. So I got actively engaged.
Right. Do they keep really tearing them down, Matt?
They do. They just tore down over. Oh, we're being recorded, so I'll behave myself. But over on Mechanic Street in Rockport, Betsy Cohen just spent $2.9 million to tear down a house in about 15 seconds. And we were just walking by, going, "Wow, okay."
All right. I know we're not issuing demo permits for houses. I just saying. Okay.
No, I gotta
Are
go
seeing
across the
some go
border.
down? Let me know.
Exactly, across the border. No, and Anita, and I should to Jeremy's point, what got me initially involved was the fact that they did tear down a house here on Jacobs Avenue, and they did it fast. And so that got me to go visit Jeremy Martin in his office many years ago. So,
Yeah.
And to the credit of the town, we have started to make attempts to make that not happen, to your point, Mr. Martin.
Yep.
Well, I look forward to a discussion about committees at some point, public
Okay.
discussion.
I think that was directed to you, Mark. Just for everyone knowledge out there, this is the a planning board workshop on May 20th. Holding this workshop on Zoom. It is being recorded live on YouTube, and comments are always welcome. This is just a workshop today. Ethan Shaw, our chair, is absent, so Matt Siegel is gonna, as vice chair, is gonna run the meeting today. Very informal discussion. Matt, I don't know if you wanna, I don't know if we're very informal, so I'm not sure you need to do anything at this point, Matt, really.
Yep, I was just going to ask, do we need a quorum? Do we need to swear in anyone if it's just a workshop?
No, we're doing a workshop and you got enough quorum here anyway, so.
Oh, great. In that case, welcome everybody. Let us begin, but we will begin, Jeremy, with a public comments on non-agenda items, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So at this point, I'm looking about and I do not see anyone. Is there anything on YouTube, Mr. Martin, that would be a person?
No,
In that case?
nothing.
We have open and closed comments, public comment on non-agenda items.
Looks like Anita's got a question, Matt.
Yep, sorry, Anita.
I don't know whether public comment on non-agenda items on the board is okay at this point.
We could
But-
do it. I would say perhaps maybe is it new business at the end, Anita, or is it something that you?
It's a request for a future discussion, not related to what we were just talking about a moment ago.
Now is probably the time for that, Anita.
Okay. I wondered whether we could have a discussion at some point regarding how to go through the process of, I forget what you name the process of a building permit, as was the case with the dentist's office. That I know that is there are a lot of legal hoops that have to be gone through by the planning board. But what occurred to me as we proceeded through that process, what occurred to me is that there was a lot of board time spent on some voting of some pretty rote things. And I was very conscious that it was taking a lot of board time basically away from other discussions that I myself consider more important to the town.
All right.
So
I think I think I get what you're saying.
I'm hoping to find a more economical methodology for jumping through the regulatory hoops that we are required to do without taking so much board time. Because then we get exhausted and don't want to talk about other issues that we need to cover.
I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, you have a role, the planning board has a role to review site plans and subdivisions, right? That is your role. And then you have another role beyond that, which is kind of the planning role. And they're two separate really distinct things. And what I try to do is I try not to have, I mean, we don't get a lot of site plan applications or subdivision applications. But when we do, I try not to load up an agenda, on that day, and just to try to get through some of those site plans, because those are required and we can't change that. If the board wants to look at the review process that someone goes through, and what, involved, what you have to weigh in on, and you want to change that or amend that in some way, we can certainly do that. That won't change the fact of the matter is that we have to do certain things under the ordinance. But we can always amend the ordinance if you think that it may be too burdensome and some things are just not necessary to be reviewed. We can do that, and we can have that in a conversation, and look actually at the site plan review section of the ordinance. We can certainly do that.
I
and
think
maybe that's
obviously it
more-
depends on how other people feel as well, but I just wanted to bring that up. I was conscious of it. And I thought it would certainly be worth discussion and as to whether we can be more economical and still do what we need to do and what's fair to the applicants.
Sure. And I've even actually heard some requests or comments from people in the public and some select board members and others that think that there should be maybe different review criteria or other criteria that should be included. And that certainly we can have that discussion.
Okay.
And we
Thank you.
should save that for an hour. I mean, I kind of like segregating these things into hour time slots because you've got a lot to work on sometimes, and you don't want to just focus on one thing at one time, but
Right.
because there's so much work. But Chriso, did you have something?
Go
Or
mute.
you want to unmute yourself?
No, I was actually joking about this with Jeannie the other day, that, that was one of those ones that it would have been great to have the option to say, I'd like to make a motion that all the criteria have been met.
Right.
But that was an application where the zoning board of appeals had already gone through a lot of the issues. So when it came, and other applications will have more issues in that process. And again, this is a conversation that we could have separate, but other communities separate zoning, have an actual zoning board that really is dealing with the planning and those things, and then has a planning board that is just doing site review. And they're two separate committees, and that's something that Camden could consider.
Yeah, and at the same time, Camden is pretty unique in their way they use their zoning board of appeals. Normally, zoning boards of appeals just handle variances and administrative appeals and things like that, and not special exceptions. Lots of communities have conditional uses or special exceptions as a separate thing that someone would get reviewed going through the planning board process. So yeah, we do some things unique, and we can certainly do it differently. And let's have that conversation at some point when we all have time to breathe, on these issues. So
Well, thank you. And
good point, Anita.
Thank you, Anita. And to your point, Anita, just to back you up, we had a similar conversation about 2 years ago about this. So it is something that has come up before, and it sounds like, Jeremy, that it would be something that we could probably address down the road.
Yeah. And I would encourage everyone to kind of review things and on their own and bounce ideas off of me, or at least just keep kind of a working document on your own and that you can share, because frankly, I can't kind of do all of the legwork with everything else that's going on. And similar to your committee questions or comments or concerns, Anita, I think the board can really do a lot of their own work on this on your own. At least dive into the ordinance and ask me questions, and Jeremy, how's this work, or why do we do this? Could we do it differently? And then maybe we can have a more thoughtful discussion when we're actually in person with each other. Make sense?
Okay.
That a yeah?
It's a muted, yeah. Thumbs up,
right.
yeah.
Good.
All right, before we move on, Andrew, anything from you? And Mark, are you there?
No, I don't have anything, Matt.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mark Siegenthaler or anything? Mark's been around on this board for a while.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything.
All right, perfect. All right.
So, yeah, but Jeremy, with that, we're going to close the session for public comment on non-agenda items. And I believe, Mr. Martin, we adjourn for a work session, if I'm not mistaken. Is that part of our process?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Matt.
Do we adjourn for a work session?
No, you're good. You're good. Nothing formal about this. This is a work session. You started the meeting. I would say we're going to amend the agenda if you can, and we're going to take that the second item off the agenda, which is the BTR, to remove. There was a just so for some background, just why we're removing it and what it was about. The BTR, which is the zoning district where the tannery is. It's a business transition river district. There's some, it's the tannery site and then going up Mount Batty Street. You all, not all of you, but some of you reviewed the Tom Hedstrom project. If you remember that, that's zone BTR, Hedstrom Electric. There's a provision in the ordinance that requires on the first floor, if you're going to have residential on the first floor, you have to have an equal area of commercial space on the first floor. And with the issues of housing that we're having and the proposals that were submitted at the tannery site, Habitat for one, and then Dovetail Northlands Group, their proposal, which had residential on the first floor, we would have had to gone through a zoning amendment to do that. I still think that's worthwhile to consider to remove that requirement in light of the housing issues we're having in town, especially in light of the tannery site and what could happen there. That said, the select board did not want to move on that one at the present time. I think there's some urgency on some other items that the town needs to address, possibly through a special town meeting. And they do think the off-street parking one in the downtown is pertinent to that and should be a part of, we should move fast on that issue. So that item 2 is taken off the agenda for today. So today we're just going to talk about off-street parking.
And Anita, you have a question?
Sorry, I'm looking at the zoning map and that I keep now in my file for our discussions. And you're saying BTR. I guess you mean BR because that's.
Yeah,
the
I'm sorry.
mark.
I'm sorry, Nita. Yes, river business.
Okay, and you're not talking about B4 across the street from
No,
there. Okay,
no,
so
just the
then
BR, river business
that would be the tannery site, and then as you mentioned,
of
sort
Mount
of
Batty.
of Mount Batty Street.
Yeah, it doesn't take into account many lots at all, to be honest with you. It's a really small part of town. Okay, that's where we were. And getting to the off-street parking, I did send out previously the off-street parking section of our zoning ordinance, which is Article 10, Part 2, Section 4. I don't know if you've all had a chance to read that. There's a lot there. The first couple of pages is pretty basic, first 3 pages, and then you get into this whole issue of how you can come up with parking and how you can lease parking, and that is it's a burdensome thing. That said, that's not the reason or intent to remove parking requirements from a downtown community, such as Camden, downtown core. I will say that we've had a handful of businesses that are, trying to come into town and have come into town. They've run up against, and these are small businesses, restaurants primarily, and even one retail store that are opening soon, that ran up against an issue where, keep in mind that these lots are lot line to lot line building, and they don't have parking available on the lot. These buildings were developed, in the 1800s, a long time ago. And so it's hard for these people to find parking, and a requirement to have parking is to be honest, it's an outdated zoning tool. It comes from after World War II in the 50s and on into the 70s, where the suburbs were taking hold and cars were everything. And so everyone was required, zoning ordinances across the country required everyone, no matter where you were in your town or city, to require off-street parking for every use. And so what we have in Camden now is the same kind of zoning ordinance and parking requirements as we haven't changed them at all. There's a serious movement, and it started in the 90s, but it's still going, to remove the off-street parking requirements in downtown villages, downtowns of cities, both large and small cities. And there's a number of reasons for that. What requiring off-street parking does is it triggers more traffic, it triggers more congestion, it encourages sprawl. There's localized air pollution from the congestion. There's water pollution, stormwater pollution from the parking lots that have, required parking or that the, rainfall falls on. It raises housing costs because it's another added development cost when you're building out a new project, especially conversions of existing downtown buildings, upper floors of buildings. It does degrade the urban village design. It also prevents walkable cities and towns. And by getting rid of them, it increases economic vitality and options and opportunities for businesses to come into the community. I mean, I don't think anyone, comes to Camden to shop at the Seabag store only. They come to Camden and they shop at the Seabag store. They go to French and Braun. They go to Once a Tree. They're visiting the entire downtown. And if we can, requiring each business to have parking for their customers, it's not the same as, a Staples being built out in the sprawled area of Rockland. And that's, zoning has never really separated those things. And now there's a lot of movement to separate those and to break that cycle. And we've had this discussion in the past. The select boards heard it from me. They've heard it, I think, more importantly, from business owners and community members that are struggling with, again, the walkability of the town because of cars, businesses that are struggling to come up with parking spaces. And I will tell you, our office, we're supposed to manage this, the parking leases over time. And we don't have a good program to do that, I will say. And so it's like this game that's played. It's happened all over the country about parking. And so we've had this discussion before. And the most recent discussion, we talked about it. Everyone, I think, thought that it was a good idea, except for allowing hotels and motels to be exempted from the parking requirements, which is a good thing. We don't have a lot of significant number of public parking spaces, although we did pick up the Knox Mill parking lot. So we did pick up 100 and some spaces, for the most part across the street from the public safety building. And we have significant on-street parking all over town. And we have a handful of other parking lots. So it is nothing new to communities. Belfast has done it, Bangor, Bath, Brunswick, Manchester, New Hampshire, Dover, New Hampshire, South Burlington, Vermont, Provincetown, Mass, Woonsocket, Rhode Island, Ashland, Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Yakima, Washington. Everyone's removing these requirements, and they're seeing no issues, and they're actually seeing increased vitality, better walkable community, and the traffic congestion is decreased because people aren't driving from parking lot to parking lot. That's my goal. And the zoning ordinance is, and I will say the select board wants this to move forward pretty quickly. You guys absolutely have a role in reviewing this, and we'll hold public hearings on all of it, and then it would go to the select board. I do think that they're anxious to do possibly a special town meeting to address this issue, and at least one other one that's a pretty significant one that has to do with public infrastructure. So that's where we are. When we had this discussion again before, we talked about some of the uses, but I did include a copy of the parking ordinance to you. Again, dwelling units need parking, have certain parking requirements, and then general businesses like medical offices, professional offices, retail, restaurants, schools, etc., theaters, public assembly locations, all have parking requirements in the ordinance. My proposal, and I'd love to want your feedback, because I do have to get a schedule and a kind of a draft together for the select board. They'd like to see something at their next meeting, June 1st, which is coming right up. But I don't think it's too hard if you guys don't have a problem with doing away with it. The one challenge will be the latter sections of the ordinance of the section, which is this alternative way of meeting your parking requirements. But that wouldn't change except for in the business, the downtown. That said, I would like to, and I don't have the zoning map up, I should have. But the Transition Harbor District, which is along Bayview, I would like to include that as well in that. Certainly not going across the harbor to Lyman Morse now, but this side of the harbor and the downtown B1 district. Keep in mind that this does not make someone get rid of parking. They'll allowed to have parking, and if they have it and it's there and it's permitted, they can still have it. They can still rent it and lease it. People still need parking, right? And it's a real market-driven thing. So that would be my proposal, is just to kind of exempt, and we can go through this list do you want me to, Matt, is it possible while I'm chatting to pull up maybe the parking ordinance that I sent to you, or Andy?
I've got that going, so that I can do. Give me
Andy,
one
you got a
second.
question?
Yeah, so the document you sent earlier with proposed edits.
Yeah, those are just samples and options,
Okay.
Yeah.
So are we not considering proposed edit number 2 now, just number 1? Is that the
Hold on.
scope? Just number 1 now?
Jeannie had come up with those like in the last half hour of the day. So,
Okay.
I'd have to read that again. I did read it and I saw it and I just don't remember it off the top of my head. But what if we go just down this little list, Matt?
Yep.
So
Chris, that should be full screen of part 2, section 4, off-street parking. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would add, just so people know, if a retail store moves out and a new retail store moves in, there is no requirement for them to get like new parking. They're still required to have the same parking. If they had a lease from before, if someone was leasing that parking before, they're required to keep that lease. But generally, if someone comes in retail to retail, they're allowed to just continue that operation. What happens sometimes, and we've had it a couple of times already this fall, actually 3 or 4 times, or this winter, fall. It takes a long time for these projects to play out sometimes, but where there was retail that was being converted to either a small restaurant with very limited seating, or retail with as Oyster River Winery that is opening up next to the town office, they're a retail shop, but they also have a tasting bar. So the tasting bar triggered, it was a retail shop years ago. If it was just a retail wine store, that would be one thing, but they needed, since they were having indoor seating, and it was a drinking establishment, they were required to have some more parking than that was there. And also, Wolf Peach ran into a similar issue. They were needed to come up with some parking as well. Keep in mind, I think everyone knows that most people walk to all of these places.
And I would invite Jeremy, before we dig into the ordinance itself, if there's any initial thoughts or feedback from the committee before we dig into.
Perfect.
the
Thank you, Matt.
No, thank you. Anita, want to start us up?
I always seem to have something to say, don't I? I support your efforts, Jeremy, to do this. And what occurs to me, first of all, I want to say I'm a little bit confused because you're talking about removing the parking requirements, and then you're talking about some of the details of these people still need to retain a parking space, and if it goes
Well-
retail to retail. So that part, if you could clarify that in a minute,
Yes. Yep.
I'd appreciate it. But what occurs to me is that I agree with you that rarely does someone drive to town to go to one place, whether it's one restaurant or one shop, unless it really is nothing's open but the restaurants. And I feel like, given especially as in not so distant history, the town has acquired additional parking and has created additional parking, that's general parking. I would propose that the town take it upon itself to make sure there's adequate parking for the businesses that exist in those two districts and just abolish the parking requirements for the businesses, because we like to encourage people to go downtown, to walk up and down the streets, to go to all the businesses and to stop in at the bar and stop in at the restaurant and do all of that. That's what keeps us being a lively
Yep.
town. And so I would rather see the town take it upon themselves to have that responsibility for those districts.
Yep. Perfect, Anita. And I will say, so first, you're right. I guess I confused it a little bit when I was referring to retail to retail and retail to a restaurant. That's something that's this thing that's plays out today currently under the zoning ordinance. Moving forward, if a retail shop downtown went away, say Main Sport went away and they wanted to turn it into a restaurant, we wouldn't then say, okay, now we got to start calculating how many seats you have so we can come up with a parking requirement for you. That will just go away completely, and they'll just be allowed to use whatever use is permitted there would be allowed to happen there, and they wouldn't need it. We wouldn't even need the parking, wouldn't even be a question at that point.
Presently, are the spaces that the businesses have been required to provide, are they leased by the business? And if we get rid of the requirement and the business has already been leasing the space in order to fulfill those requirements, what happens to that expense going forward for that business?
Well, I think, again, this is a market-driven thing. Because the requirement goes away does not mean people don't need parking, right? So people will still, parking will still be needed. The town will just not require it for uses and will not have to manage it from a change of use to another change of use, unless it's a hotel, if you will, conversion. But the idea is that, and this plays out when communities do this, is the parking, people still need parking, and employees still need a place to park. And so the owners of those shops will still lease certain parking spaces. They just won't need to, it won't be such a regulated thing from a town end, and the market just manages that, and it plays out successfully community after community.
Well, let's take the scenario that we have an established stop that has done its work getting the parking, and then a new shop coming in does not have to fulfill a parking requirement. We've got a basic unfairness there.
Understood. So these leases that people get are generally, I've heard 6 month and 1 year.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
It is, I guess it depends on when that person signed the lease for the parking. Go ahead, Chriso.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, if we drop the requirements, other businesses who currently lease a space would no longer be required to, so they would be on an equal footing, to Anita's point. They would be able to relinquish that.
Yeah, but they may be required to continue the 6 months of the lease. They still have an unfairness there.
Well,
Well, I mean, there would be, but I guarantee you that any business owner in town who says, well, I'd only have 3 months left of my lease, but then I could get out of it and not have to lease parking places would be very happy.
To let
Right.
it play out.
Yeah, agreed.
Can I ask, Jeremy, because we all have opinions about parking and congestion, and just objectively, do we have the inventory? What is the consideration on an objective level in terms of the inventory of parking, current parking? So Anita and I have a business and we no longer required, but can we confidently know that there would be sufficient parking at this point?
Yeah, and I briefly pulled out the parking study that was done not too long ago, and I'll send that to you all. We're
Not the
confident.
Seawall stuff. Okay.
I've looked at the numbers, and I've looked at what similar sized cities had for parking existing, and they had their numbers ready and available when I was looking at some things. And I certainly think with the addition of the Knox Mill lot, the lot that's behind the town office, there are, I think, 10 spaces there. Those are now being freed up. Town employees are not parking there any longer. The lot that's across the street that has been taken up as other employee lots, that's going to become a parking lot that is 2-hour parking. So I think we certainly combine that with on-street parking, along with the public safety lot and the lots down in the lot down at the harbor. I don't think we have a parking problem. And if you talk to people that say there's a parking problem, the parking problem is that people have become accustomed to parking in front of where they want to go. And that's what they demand and that's what they want. And if they don't get that, then that's the parking problem. And that's a tough nut to crack, and you're not going to change those people's minds. But the reality is, I remember in Bangor when I was there, people would be stressed and angry about having to park around the corner from a certain business downtown, yet they go to the mall and they park, a quarter mile away from the entrance. And that's not a problem. That's perfect.
Because they used
Even
to.
though they were 20 feet away from the shop that they were going to, they just had to walk around the corner. It's about perspective.
Jeremy, that's what I wanted to talk about also. I'm glad you touched on that.
Go ahead.
Basically, we don't have a parking problem except for 60 days a year.
Yeah.
And then we have a tremendous parking problem. And the employees, like you say, they become accustomed to parking in front of where they work. So they continue that all summer. And then they play the 2-hour shuffle game and keep moving their car every 2 hours. And I have no idea how to fix that or even suggest it. But that's what's going on.
It is going on. And I know when Audra freed up the parking lots across the street from the town office, the new Washington Street lot and the one behind between us and Long Grain, that was our first concern, was that, well, it's just going to be it's going to be taken up by Long Grain, staff, and everyone else's staff's just going to park there. The reality is we're going to post those as 2-hour parking. I think some will maybe be a 30-minute parking behind the town office. And as I understand, the police is going to patrol. And I think that's important. I know people don't like to hear that. But in order to until we deal with Bar Harbor has a they implemented new parking kiosks, if you will, spaces. And I know that's a big issue, but they, I think, brought in, many millions of dollars over the course of one summer. And that's going a long way to potentially build public infrastructure, parking infrastructure. Until we get to that point, I think we're going to struggle a little bit, Mark, in those 60 days, because you're right. Those employees park and they want to park right there. Audra is very clear that we're not going to tolerate those employees, especially in those lots that we can manage pretty easily. I think that employee shuffle or that employee forever in that spot. We've got to open it up. And it is a 2-month problem, if you will. And I still always find a place to park in Camden. I think you all do too.
Well, that's because you come to work early and you leave late.
Yeah, I'm in and out of the office every day, all day long. So I still find my spot to park. So, do you want to go through this list? I mean, and I think it's just important. And, you know, I had sent something else. Jeff Senders has been thinking about this as well. And he's, I don't know if you all know Jeff, he's a former planning board member. He's been on the board a long time, local engineer as well. And he's kind of he's come up with some suggestions too, and is really pretty much just removing the requirement for off-street parking. His suggestion was in the business B1 and in the BH, and just make an ordinance amendment, a section that says the following shall not apply to, you know, in the B1 and transitional harbor. Do you think, and I don't think there's any need, going down through this list, I keep trying to move that list. So you see dwelling units in the downtown. I don't think we should even require dwelling units in the downtown to have parking either. You know, those are people that are living here. I've known people that have lived downtown, upstairs. They don't get a parking spot, but they park all year, and they do it successfully. The one use, and then we get to general businesses.
I just, to go back to the dwelling.
Congregate housing.
Well, just dwelling units in,
Yeah.
I mean, getting rid of the parking requirement for that will also greatly help us with anybody who's trying to do any kind of affordable housing
Yeah.
in the center of town. If you remove
doubt.
that requirement, it changes a developer's perspective entirely. So it just makes that a hugely more appealing thing to get that to happen. If
For
we pull
sure.
that requirement.
For sure. I will say that this is not a, at some point, we're going to do a bigger brainstorm on the parking and looking at dwelling units like in the village zone and in the village extension as well. But the select board's pretty clear that they'd like this to kind of move forward this track and they realize that you guys are thinkers and want to like not do a partial job, or, you know, do you want to tackle the whole thing and look at it holistically? And that's important, but and we'll still do that. But I think right now we'll just focus on the business transition, our harbor transition district, and the B1. And then we get to medical offices, same. I think we ought to remove that requirement, and then same for retail, business professional office. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't, my first take, not having given this a lot of thought, is that the medical office is one thing that I think a parking space near the medical office would be needed. Because people do, it's a destination. You drive in, you go to the office, and you leave again. And more often than not, you go there because you need some medical help, and maybe that affects your ability to walk blocks. So
Yeah, I
I
understand
don't know
that.
if I'd remove that.
I understand that. I think, I mean, we could do that. I think the one, you know, it's, again, some of this is market driven. And if a doctor or a podiatrist wants to locate on the second floor in a downtown building, you know,
Yeah.
they're going to struggle to get their patients there. And that's not, you know, I think the market drives that one, and from my perspective, and that's what happens elsewhere. But go ahead.
Christo?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, keep in mind, we're really just talking about B1,
Right.
which
Yeah.
we don't, I happen to have the map up on my computer. I know you have it. It's a pretty small
Do you want to
portion
switch shares?
town. And this doesn't mean that a doctor's office can't have their own spaces and have them. It just means that it doesn't require them. And as Jeremy just said, like, if you think about what locations there are in that district, even for a doctor's office, there's not a lot of places there that's going to have more than one or two patients at a time. So that requirement, you know, I think most medical offices are going to be slightly outside, like the dentist that we just did.
Right.
where they have parking and they can have room. There's just, if you look at those properties, you're looking at a few houses that have 1 or 2 spots anyway. There's just not a lot of options in that space.
Agreed.
Or to your point, Chris, if they're outside of the zone, like the Brian Davis's Hope Clinic and things like that, where they have it part of the
Right.
part of the
Yeah.
property.
And a massage area, a massage business is not considered a medical office anyway. We've got a massage right there next to Eric's Barber Shop, for instance.
Mhm.
So I guess that's not a medical office anyway.
But even, Eric's Barbershop doesn't guarantee a parking spot.
That's true.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, and my daughter saw a physician, a doctor, still a doctor, in one of the downtown buildings, and we had to find a parking spot, and you went there. I mean, if you want to see that professional, you're going to see that professional no matter what it takes. So, all right.
You're talking about eliminating these parking spots altogether or reducing it by square footage?
We're talking about just removing the requirement for these uses in the B1 and in the transition harbor district, removing the requirement for them to have parking.
Right.
It does not force them to remove parking. It doesn't make them not have parking. That said, there are towns that have taken this even further and said, not only we're going to get rid of minimum parking, we're going to limit maximum parking. So we're gonna limit the parking you can have. We're not there at all. That's what we're looking to do, Mark. Matt, you want to keep going? Industry and manufacturing, those are not uses that are allowed in the zone, so that wouldn't apply. This multifamily, that would go away again for the B1 and the BTH. This is where you guys mentioned the last time, lodging. Hotels, motels, inns and rooming houses. You mentioned that you did not want to remove that requirement, didn't think that was prudent, and I tend to agree with you. People come in from away for those to stay at hotels and motels and inns.
Anita, do you want to jump in?
ahead.
You mentioned in earlier situations that the market will drive whether or not that business makes parking available, and wouldn't that be true for hotels and motels?
I guess that's true. Hotels and motels in other communities, like say Hanover, New Hampshire. I mean, they're building parking lots underneath their hotels. But I will say that lodging facilities, when towns like ours, more touristy places, they do keep hotels. I've seen them keep hotels and lodging, to be required to have parking.
So it's in their best interest to have parking available. And if we have 2-hour parking lots that the town provides, then they're not going to be able to use those. So the business itself would pretty much have to come up with their own parking, wouldn't they?
What's that have to do with the town parking lots?
Well, the town parking lots typically are 2-hour
Right.
lots. I think there maybe is the back of the fire department lot probably isn't a 2-hour. But anyway, I'm just thinking that it seems to me that the market would tell the hotel owner they need to make parking available, because
It
the
would, and if
person
you
is going
want,
to say, where should I park?
right. I mean, I can reach out to some of the hotel owners in town and ask the question, and just have a discussion. But I know that this came up the last time. I think the last time we had this conversation, I think everyone was comfortable removing the downtown parking requirement except for hotels and motels and inns. So
I think that's true, and I think it's important to keep parking in place for hotels.
how about the rest of the board?
I agree with keeping it for them, because it also makes it clear for their guests where they should park.
Mhm.
And whether that's, whether that's in a lot that they own or whether they have dedicated spaces in a lot nearby that they leave, like it's a very specific, they can tell their guests And the town knows that those spots are for those hotels, and it's a very clear, and
Yep.
we could say, we could rely on their best interest, but I think I think it's important to keep it in.
I know we're very different than downtown Rockport, but
I wasn't going to mention that.
Yeah.
clearly parking's an issue there. So,
I wasn't going
And
to
I-
mention satellite lots and hotels, but
we do allow satellite lots here. Okay, restaurants, bars, and lounges. That's another one that we should just not require. It's for the same reason. And school,
Well, wait, let's back up to that.
okay,
What are your thoughts on maybe not eliminate it completely, but just reducing it and base it on a square footage? Like what I was
No, Mark.
reading,
Go ahead.
I think what I was reading someplace was they required 8 spaces for 1,000 square feet of restaurant area.
Mm.
Instead of breaking it up by the seats and the benches and,
Yeah.
I
I think my perspective is it's similar to, again, if Main Sport or business downtown went away and a small, unique, cool restaurant bar came into that space, is it really any different? I know that you end up spending an hour or two there. But are you really just coming to that space? I think you're spending your day in the downtown, and you're shopping everywhere, and you're walking around, and it's part of the same fabric. I kind of consider it the same as retail for the most part. And I don't, I don't know. I could stand in, Once a Tree's got some pretty cool stuff. I can stand in there for an hour or two. I don't know. I don't think you should treat it any differently than you do retail or offices, to be honest. That's my perspective on that. I mean, we've got 2 restaurants right now that are in very small spaces that had to come up with parking. The number of guests in there, that if it was just a retail shop, is going to be greater than the number of people that are in their little small restaurant thing, because it's so small. But since it was a change of use and the way the floor was laid out, they had to go get some parking. Well, I don't think it's appropriate to separate that as a use that requires parking from the ones that don't. But that's me. My gut says there'll be some pushback in the community. And I know your job is to do planning and make recommendations and all that. But I do.
Well, I agree, Jeremy. I mean, I kind of have mixed emotions about that, and I understand on the small little restaurants that you're talking about, it's probably not necessary for parking, but the larger restaurants, I mean, when you've got, you've got a capacity of 80 to 100 people.
Yeah.
That's
Why don't we look at, I hear that. Why don't we look see what's existing restaurants seating? I'll pull up the Vichler's licenses that we have, and I'll look at what their seating is listed as, and just kind of look and see what we have in town. And I'll look at elsewhere. I mean, I think that's a good point. If you can seat, a couple hundred people or so in your restaurant, or 100 people or so, maybe you should have some parking to facilitate that. I mean, it's a very different scenario than some of these smaller,
Right.
Restaurants that are kind of coming in unique.
Right. So that's why, I mean, if we based it on a square footage, say, hey, restaurants under 1,500 square feet don't require parking,
Okay.
and over 1,500,
A smaller number.
whatever, 10
Well, I guess-
spaces. Or,
Mhm.
I guess the piece of it for me that's hard with the restaurant, and this is sort of counter to what I was just saying about hotels, is that if a restaurant is providing parking, and say it's Long Grain and they've leased parking spaces somewhere, no one who's going to Long Grain is using, they're parking where as close as they can.
So true.
So we're requiring the restaurant to lease spaces somewhere, but they're not necessarily being used by their customers.
So true.
And so I think that dichotomy, you know, and again, in B1, you're looking at what, 40 papers not in, you've got sail loft, I'm sorry, waterfront sail loft.
That's dating you.
Which has some parking, but doesn't have enough. You know, so is it like,
Well, it's the equivalent, Chris, of a use tax to a certain degree. This is the mandatory.
yeah, it's
I
like
do
they're
have a question,
subsidizing parking.
Crystal, can I cut you off for 1 second about, Jeremy, do we have a sense of what each of these leases costs a business? So again, this is going to dovetail into Mark's about the larger restaurants. Anticipating that, Mark, there might be some
Yeah.
pushback from that half dozen or 8 restaurants of a certain size who are going to say you are unfairly burdening us with, again, a fee, a mandatory required fee. So do we have a sense of what the lease costs are to these establishments?
Yeah. I heard recently, I think I heard $600 for the year for a space.
So it's not a small chunk of change.
No, not a small chunk of change for a small startup, you know, outfit trying to do something in a small space. You know, they're already limited based on the seating that they can do already, you know.
And Mark, if we were to take on the tiered approach, which you suggest, which has certain merits, because you have so much experience in this, Mark, do you see that there will be pushback from those 6 or 8 restaurants?
No, I don't see that because they've already got the parking requirements and they meet.
Right,
those
they already got it.
requirements.
Exactly. I feel the same.
And, but I'm saying, you know, don't hold them to where they're at now, but, you know, and let's look at it. I mean, what's the waterfront restaurant? What are they required to have?
Right. Get the statistics.
20,
Yeah, I don't-
40 spaces, 20 spaces or?
One seat for every 4 seat, one space for every 4 seats.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're up there. They've got, I'd say, I'm guessing, but let's say 30 parking spaces, but, and what I'm suggesting is you don't hold them to that standard anymore, but you
Lower
maybe
that.
hold them to 15 spaces or.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Okay, good point.
Good. Anita, did you want to jump in?
Yes, please. I've always wondered how it plays out when a business leases parking spaces and yet doesn't necessarily require their the people using that business to actually use the space. What I want to know is whether that space that's been leased by the business actually ends up going unused because that business owns, in a sense, that space. So are we going to be actually potentially opening up more parking because they don't have to tie up spaces, or are the spaces not tied up? I've resided here 28 years. I still don't understand how that works.
Yeah, I think a lot of the employees use that leased space. I mean, it doesn't sit empty.
Well, Jeremy, I'd appreciate your explaining how that works. Are all those leased spaces reserved for that business? And can other people use it? And will that change
No,
with
they're
this change?
supposed to be reserved for that business. And what I have been told anecdotally, I haven't followed up on it, just don't have the time to dive into it right now. But that spaces have been leased multiple times over and over and over. And that, you know, they're supposed to carry the lease annually. Yeah, every year you've got to renew the lease. And my gut says is some businesses probably haven't renewed it. I'm just being honest.
But how does it play out?
I think it would potentially free up some spaces. I think it would also, you know, would just kind of change the whole dynamic about parking in Camden. Because there's like this appears to be this game that's being played. And it's not unique to Camden. But managing parking is an enforcement person's nightmare. Like in my office, that's a nightmare. Meanwhile, the people, like Chriso said, the restaurant has to lease space, but the people eating there they're parking, wherever they're parking, and they're walking to the restaurant. That's what's happened.
I suspect that lot that's across from the Episcopal Church off of Chestnut
The
on the
Camden
corner
National
there
Bank.
is
Camden National
probably,
Banks.
see, it's probably, who would know that unless it's all entirely for their employees.
That's one, that would be the exception in the, that one actually is marked.
Yeah, with a
rules
gate.
and regulations. So that
Yeah.
one would be, almost the exception to the rule.
Uh-huh.
Coming from a big city like Los Angeles, where I lived and worked for many years, you would go into a parking lot and you would see the marking, the signage of whose space this was, whether it was a personal space or whether it was a business. We don't have that right here. And to Chris's point, would we suddenly, in theory, Jeremy, we would be seeing, if Matt and Anita had their burger joint, that we would see a mark, the signage on these certain spaces that say Matt and
Correct.
Anita's burger joint. That is certainly not the current situation, nor will it or should it ever be. And moving forward, I think what we're doing, Chriso, is, we heard the nice, tell me the name, Wolf Peach is their new restaurant. And I think what we're really doing here is we're relieving the burden of some of these small businesses and making it more attractive to come to our town and to open a small business is what the goal is of this particular change. Mark, I just wanted to circle back to the pushback based on the waterfront and just the idea that, if they're spending $18,000 roughly a year on parking spaces, pick a number, are you going to get some pushback, Jeremy, from that business owner saying, why do I have to spend $18,000 a year when Joe Blow next to me doesn't have to spend anything? So I just, again, want to anticipate that and just see, make sure that we're thinking that there might be some pushback from those 6 or 8 is my guess.
Why would we get the pushback from them?
Because they would still be required.
No, they wouldn't. Oh,
No, under Mark's. So let me be
Under
clear.
Mark's scenario.
Under
but it would
Mark's
be,
tiered
sure.
restaurants.
It would be a lesser amount they would have to rent than currently, right?
Yep. And so there would be, again, we would go back to them and say that we have adjusted. We've made a compromise for you as well.
Yeah.
Well, and the whole theory behind that is the impact it has on the town.
Right.
If they're seating 80 to 100 or 120 people compared to another restaurant that's seating 20, there's a much greater impact.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a point well taken. I know we're missing 2 board members, but what does everyone think about this? And I understand where Mark's coming from. I do, as part of this process, the select board wants, they want kind of an update on where this is going on June 1. And then, we would have on June 3rd, hopefully a review draft, revise or approve as is, and then we would schedule public hearing right off.
Hold that thought for 1 second, Jeremy. Andrew, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I had a quick question. It feels like a very complicated issue in terms of understanding what the consequences might be of, making these changes. And I'm wondering if there's a way you can, suspend those parking requirements for a year and see what happens, and then have a better understanding of how it impacts things. Would that be unmanageable or?
A test case.
Well, I think legally the problem, I wish Attorney Shaw was here. I think legally, we would need to probably, I don't know. Okay. Tell the select board to tell the code officer and myself, do not enforce any of the parking requirements in the downtown for the next year. Or to get public awareness about it, does the town actually, the legal way to do it, adopt a zoning ordinance amendment to sunset or to, the parking requirements for here? and do something like that. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's possible, Andy. But I don't know, right now, we did have there were a slug of vacant buildings and spaces downtown, coming on the heels of COVID. Last summer, I think everyone saw a fair amount of vacant storefronts. We've seen those all filled up right now,
Mhm.
mostly full downtown now. I mean, it's great to see that. So are we going to be able to see that influx of change in 1 year? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure we would be able to do that.
I think it's a great idea, but I think it would, in reality, I think it would create more issues than it
Yeah.
would solve.
It's, the confusion.
Yeah.
It's like, what if you're gonna open a business in town? Say, great, we don't need parking spaces, so we're gonna open a business. And then next year,
Right.
you're
Yeah.
you're all
Well, it's
set
hard
up.
to reimpose it after a
Yeah.
year, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
And Chriso, did you have something you wanted to
Yeah,
add?
well, first, I got to let you guys know my internet is, to those who care about internet, my internet is really buggy tonight. I don't know how much longer I keep losing the feed. But
So in
just
that
to sort
case,
of,
Chriso, you want to vote on that article that's going to be on the ballot that's coming up? Just a little plug there.
yeah. But I would sort of say to Andy's point, what was interesting was last summer when Rockland blocked off lots of streets and reduced their parking, and some of that is still reduced to parking. One of the things that we saw, if you spent a lot of time in Rockland, was traffic flowed much better because people were not trying to find a parking space on Main Street. So they weren't sort of stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And it really improved the flow. And on the question of large restaurants, again, I just sort of go back to the fact, like, we're looking at B1. The options for someone to put a 100-seat restaurant in that area are pretty limited at this point, unless it's in a property where they get a destruction permit and tear some historic home down and put a parking lot.
Well, I mean, I think Mark's point being, what, they got 100 seats down there, Mark, you were thinking?
Well, I mean,
It's possible. I mean, any of these downtown buildings, that they can turn it's possible. I mean, that things happen. I don't want to miss an opportunity. I think it's possible that you could see a large restaurant. I mean, you could get another Sea Dog downtown somewhere. I mean, how many seats do they have? They've got a fair number of seats when they're built out. So I think it's possible.
Sea Dog, you've got Blaze, you've got Peter Otts, you've got the waterfront.
Yeah.
And then Mark, from last year, I mean, we had the Lyman Morse construction project where they had the benefit of having the land, and Gartley Dorsky did some engineering to give them those, I believe it was 129 or 126 spots.
Yeah, that's a whole zone.
That was the whole, exactly, that was the other side there. So that would be, again, a different situation. So other comments, Andy, you're good? Trisso, anything else? on that? No? Jeremy, you want to finish up this list while Chriso is still with us?
Sure. What I'll do is I'll have two options available for the select board and you folks. Do you think that's appropriate on the restaurant piece? I'll dig in and figure out if I can come up with a number on the seats and a reduction from what's currently there, and apply to only restaurants of a certain size. I'll take a look at what square footage for the Sea Dog and every restaurant that we have and just come up with, see what's out there. And I'll work on that at some point. Schools, I don't think we should work on this one at all. Again, no big issue. I'm trying to move the document.
Are you guys, are you guys seeing this, Jeremy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it
thinks that he's sharing, so he's trying to.
He's very optimistic in his telekinetic controls. So, but we will, if you coach, I will happily move the cursor.
Okay, so then we get down to medical care facilities. I think we should keep that in place. Obviously, we're not going to get a hospital, but we could get a nursing and convalescent home. It's possible. I think we should keep that. Public place of public assembly, theaters and halls. I think we should not have a requirement for them either. You know, it'd be really neat to have. I mean, we got the Opera House. You know, pretty amazing. We used to have a movie theater downtown, and I don't think we should require, if someone wanted to do another movie theater in town, what an awesome thing that would be for the downtown.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, all those would be nighttime where there's plenty of parking anyways.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay.
Churches, again, I don't, you know, if a church wants to come down and open up in town, they can do that, but they're going to realize that, you know, their parishioners or whatever members are going to have to figure out where they need to park. Obviously, we don't have any campgrounds downtown and won't and don't allow them. So, and that's where we are. So that's kind of my suggestion on, we'll keep lodging, and then I'll give a couple, I'll do one exempts restaurants and then one that looks at restaurants based on size and seating. Does that sound like a plan for you all?
So what you're doing here is a separate designation for downtown parking.
Yeah, so it could happen in a couple ways. You saw Jeannie's Way, and I mean, I appreciate Jeannie's Way where she said a raised one next to a certain use in the B1 and yada, yada, yada. That's how our ordinance, we use a lot of that raised one, and that frankly, from someone that has to use the zoning ordinance a lot and from applicants looking through our zoning ordinance, it creates a lot of confusion. I would prefer to just have a section mark that says, you know, maybe it will be in each section. I haven't really figured out where I'm gonna do it, but it'll either be a section that says the following uses in B1 and B and transitional harbor are exempt from parking requirements. That plainly, that simple.
Except the following.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And I would need to.
Or the other way I would suggest is under section 4.
Yep.
If you just designated 2 areas and parking requirements for B1 and BTH and parking
Everyone else.
requirements for every other zone.
Okay. That makes sense.
Just throwing ideas out there for you.
Yep. Thank you.
I like the square footage restaurant idea. I'm wondering how that might play out when you try to sort it out. I think that.
How would it play out?
No, I'm just saying, I don't know how it would, but I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Square footage.
Yeah.
I think that's what they had in that example I emailed out earlier,
Utah.
the Salt Lake
Salt Lake
City.
City.
I think they
Yeah.
did
On
it
the other
like
hand,
that.
the complication with that is to how to handle the outdoor seating for restaurants when the weather is good, and then only indoor only seating when the weather isn't. That can be a very significant difference in number of seats for a restaurant. And that's ought to be wrestled with a little bit, maybe. 'Cause some restaurants don't have any outdoor seating and some have a lot of outdoor seating. And of course, they can't use it when the weather's bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so figure out how that's dealt with now with tables.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'll follow up on that. I mean, you know, frankly, I think what a lot of communities do with and we haven't seen a lot of it in Camden, but the outdoor seating that we do have, I mean, there's an explosion of it in a lot of places. And frankly, I think a lot of communities look at that as a temporary thing and they look the other way. Just being honest.
I would tend to agree with that and think it might make sense.
Yeah.
Will there be any way to track the effect of this going forward? And I am kind of interested in I mean, I'm kind of looking at this as like, let's just do it, select board, make that decision, and then, it goes on from there with this change, and I don't know whether there'd be any way of determining what effect that might have um, on business and that sort of thing. And then putting on my Pathways Committee hat, if that frees up any walking space, which is really good for commercial activity and liveliness by widening a sidewalk, or does anything in that realm, that would be great. And then I'm also interested in whether this change might have any direct effect on the town's decision to seek more town-sponsored parking, or to take on as town-sponsored or owned the spaces that had been leased by businesses.
I,
And
I, I understand. I will say that, we are looking at potentially looking at a parking management system in town, which is probably when a lot of that will be, we'll dive into a lot of that then. And as far as pedestrian and pathways, I think one of the biggest things that we could see and may see, and I know people may not think this, but the reality is that when you do, and it happens over time, when you start removing these requirements, congestion does go down in communities. And we may see some of that here in Camden, which then makes pedestrian activities a lot safer. We are also, the select board had done I don't know what you want to call it, but they did do a statement on pedestrian, the need for pedestrian safety, and that it was a goal of theirs, and the town is, committed to that. We're working to address the proximity of parking spaces to crosswalks. Our crosswalks in downtown are way non-compliant. They're not safe for not just the pedestrians, but we've heard it from the drivers too. The drivers that hit someone it impacts them too. If you hit somebody. So it's a concern that we hear from a lot of people. So we're working to address it. Part of the Lyman Morse project, I talked about trying to work with the town to facilitate safer pedestrian activity over in that area of town. And so I think the town's really committed to addressing, pedestrian safety. And I think this could be just one part of it, Anita. And we may not see the fruits of it for some time, but these are all positive things.
could you request when you present to the select board that they do some purposeful discussion regarding their commitment to adding public parking as and being sort of committed to providing the public parking for the downtown
Well, I think,
businesses?
sure. And I mean, yeah, we can do that. And I think everyone's got that right to let the select board hear that, on their own. I will say the town, we're in the process, we're leasing 100 some odd parking spaces right now. That happened in the last couple of years. So, we are doing that currently. It's a plan to move on further from there, and how to make sure that we do have, frankly, I'd like to see some, when we did the parking lot across, the Washington Street lot, I thought that was a prime location, not for parking, but for a building.
A parking building?
Oh, not a parking building necessarily, but a building, a new development in down. I mean, I think that was a prime location. At the same time, as a planner, you look at where can you do parking structures, right? I mean, I think, and no one likes to hear a parking garage, but a parking structure is very different. If you've ever been up to Bangor recently or at all, the Columbia Street parking garage, at the surface on one side of the street, it looks like it's a service lot, but below it, as you come down Hammond Street, there's an entrance into the bottom of that parking structure. So I think the public safety lot is a prime location for something like that, because the grades are working for you, where you wouldn't lose space in a parking garage that has the drive, the travel aisle up to the next deck, because you can actually come in at grade closest to the fire station and be in a parking deck that's on the ground level, and you could go up further to the second entrance that takes you to the top end of the lot, and you could come in out of what would appear to be a surface parking lot, but it's actually the roof of the parking garage below. So
I would have liked to see this discussion take place before Mechanic Street corner lot was redone, because it seems to me that would have been a perfect place to make a 2-story garage with the entrance to the second story from
Yeah,
Washington Street.
I understand you wouldn't have gotten enough spaces out of the investment, Anita. I looked at it. It's certainly set up for it, but when you structurally are building a garage like that, you do need, and there's just not a lot of space there. I looked at it. But
Okay. And would this change in parking have any effect on the need for, or could I be a proponent for more visible bike parking spots, racks?
hey, I think
So
that's
that-
I think that's a great idea. And I think, working with the select board and probably Public Works and Parks and Rec potentially, I think that is a great idea to have some defined locations where we have bike parking. I think
Right.
that's,
Because you're reducing parking, you're reducing the spots that the businesses provide for parking, and
Yeah.
we want to encourage people to ride their bikes into town,
Yeah.
and they can park them there.
So Jeremy, what's the story on that parking space that we've eliminated downtown? What's that gonna be?
which one? Right there, the 15-minute spot?
Yep.
Yeah, that's no longer a parking space. That is actually they had to bump that out, federal dollars involved. They had to bump that out, and it's a much safer pedestrian. If you look at where the tip downs are, it's hard to, you can see where the new crosswalk will be. So that's going to be in essence a bumped out island that leads you to the handicapped accessible crossing that takes you over to French and Braun. There appears to be, I think we're going to do some planting in there as well, actually, Mark.
I'd like to see some benches in there,
We actually talked about that. We were just there, and this is kind of a neat thing. No one knows about this yet, but we're doing a kind of a little pilot program. The University of Maine Cooperative Extension, they're the folks at Esperanza from the University of Maine who lives in Camden, and Parker Gassett, who works for the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, they came up with some funding for a handful of communities on the mid-coast to do some demonstration kind of stormwater improvement project. And that sidewalk and some roof runoff, we're going to try to actually get into if you will, a rain garden in that area. And we talked about putting some benches in that location, Mark. Yep, as part of that.
It's speaking of benches, have you looked into like more benches on Main Street and in the commercial area? I think that would help tremendously for businesses.
Yeah.
If your wife is in shopping and you don't have any place to sit out on the street, you're going to drag her out of the store.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I'll talk to Audra and Public Works and see what we can do. I totally agree. It makes the community more livable. It makes it more, just kind of the vitality and of the community if people are out as if it's their spot to hang out. So I totally agree. And we can do things like that more. We should.
Maybe with that, we could tie that in with the bench program of the harbor.
Yeah. Good idea.
Just going to say, Mark, to your point, it might be in our best interest to coordinate with other committees, whether that would be CDAC or the bench committee in the harbor, starting to do, I don't know, again, from my years, I haven't seen a lot of commingling of the agendas of these different committees. This might be an opportunity.
Yeah, or we could just get some park benches out there.
Yeah.
Let's do that, Jeremy.
What happened to all this cooperation
No,
stuff?
that doesn't go against the cooperation of the committees working together, but something
No, I'm with you. Good
more
Lord.
park benches out. We can do that.
Commingling of committees can't happen if committees aren't supposed to be meeting, Mark.
They're coming. They're
We're
coming.
meeting. Okay.
Could you
Well,
clarify, Jeremy, where that rain garden might be sited exactly?
What's
Where
that?
you were talking about a rain garden that Esperanza and Parker are working on getting funding for. Where I
No,
wasn't clear on where
they've
that.
got funding. They've got funding that they're going to pass through to Knox County Soil and Water Conservation District. At which point they're going to pass it through to us and actually pay for plant material to go into there. And we're going to do it while we're working with DOT while they're doing that right now. This kind of happened last minute, actually, in the last,
Is that in front of Camden National Bank?
no, at
In
the,
front of,
where Mark was talking about with the 15, where the 15-minute parking spot went away,
where's that? Is that French and Braun?
across the street.
Across the street from French and Braun is Camden National Bank.
No, sorry, across
Oh.
Mechanic
Street.
Street. Sorry,
The
across
other-
Mechanic
On the
Street.
corner.
Yeah,
Got it. Thank you.
because that bump out gets much safer. It's a much more
Right.
pronounced bump out there where the tip down for the handicap
So-
problem is.
So
Yeah.
Jeremy, just to clarify,
Yeah.
that was done because it's federally funded and that was their requirement?
Well, it worked into also their drainage requirements too. Yeah. They can't spend when they're doing a big project like that, Mark, we've run into a lot of issues there. And they're pedestrian people, they're multimodal pedestrian, gentleman was in town and he was very, part of this whole process. I'm doing the, coming up with the drainage plans and project. And we recognize that there are significant issues in town and the site distances at a lot of our intersections and crosswalks are not good. And so the intent was to,
Yeah, I understand. I mean, that's important downtown because there's a lot to see,
yeah,
you
Yep.
know, and people drive through and their heads are just swiveling. And
Yep. All right.
I had a question, Jeremy.
Yes.
On the summer congestion, I thought Mark said it well. We have this 60-day parking problem
Yeah.
in the summer. Is that a topic that's being worked on some other committee? Because it feels like an opportunity if the parking requirements are, in upheaval, that should be tied into that discussion to help solve that problem.
good luck with that one.
Yeah. Good luck with that one. Sorry, I didn't say that. Mark Segan did. I mean, I think the reality is, we're on Route 1. We're a beautiful, probably the most beautiful community in the state, for sure. And we're on Route 1 and people come here in the summertime. I mean, this is where people come here. And to try to deal with that, I mean, you look at what's happened in Wiscasset and other communities, and they did bypasses. Waldoboro, they did a bypass. Damascotta, they did a bypass. Those people just zoom on by. There's no bypass coming to Camden, and those people are coming through our town. And I mean, as much as it's a thorn, and I think a lot of people's side, it's a blessing that we do have because we do, people do come here, experience what Camden is, and they keep coming back, and then they move here, and and they keep our businesses afloat. So if they were around town, we'd be in trouble.
I moved here from Annapolis. I lived, close to downtown Annapolis. And when it was real busy down there for the weekends and, when the Naval Academy had things going on, they would operate a trolley, around the town. So people
Good
could
idea.
just get on and get off. I don't know. That feels like a business opportunity for somebody in Camden in the summertime to help solve that problem. So
Yeah. I will say, and I don't want to I do think this idea of this parking management system that the town may be embarking on, those really help communities that deal with congestion and parking issues over time. So that may help, but I appreciate your point. Someone came into the office and they asked me if they could step their bike with the little buggy on the back and act as a little, as if you're in Thailand or somewhere, and you're sitting back on the backside and you got a handful of people and someone's riding a bike.
a rickshaw type thing.
Rickshaw, yeah, taking you from place to place. So we may see one of those one of these days here in Camden. Someone came in the office to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But
I just wanted to mention, we just had our first post-COVID guests. which was delightful. And they came from Boulder, Colorado, friends from when we lived there. And they took a look around town and they said, "Oh, now we understand why you're not coming back to Boulder." They were blown away by our town. And we just got a new neighbor in our in our neighborhood who moved here from Bar Harbor and is thrilled beyond measure to be in Camden. So I think we're
Awesome.
pretty lucky.
For sure.
Mhm.
All right.
All right, folks.
Sound good?
Last comments, questions?
I'll draft something up and share it with you. I'm gonna draft it and send it to select too. Timeline is gonna be kind of moving on this one, so hopefully you guys are good. Send me comments on. I'm gonna try to take some time off tomorrow or next week. I need to actually. So I will try to get something out to you in the next couple of days. I've got to finish a grant that we're applying for the snowball. So I'm going to do that, but I will try to get something out to you. And give me your comments, your feedback, because I do want to get this to the select board on the first with where you guys are with this so that we can just kind of move forward from there and get it ready for a town meeting whenever the select board decides to do that.
Excellent.
Okay.
And thank you, Mark, for your suggestion in terms of
Restaurant.
the restaurant. Anything else? Last comments, Andy, Anita, you're good? Mark, you're good before we sign off for the evening?
Mark Ratner?
Yes.
Oh, no, Mark Ryder, Mark Siegenthaler?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay. Jeremy, thank you so much for bringing
Sure.
that to us and for your hard work. With
Yeah,
that,
enjoy your time off.
yes, enjoy your time off.
Yeah, I got to use it or I lose it. So
Ooh.
Enjoy using it. And as we all say here, good night to you all. And that would be the unofficial motion to adjourn, which is
perfect.
everyone's perfect way to end the evening. Stay healthy, everyone, and thank you for your time and your energy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.